Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Uncensored CMO. Now, in this episode, we're talking about one of the world's greatest brand-led organizations, Mars. They own some of the most amazing confectionery brands that you'll have heard of, like Mars, Snickers, Twix, Skittles, M&M's, to name just a few. Now, I'm joined by Rankin Carroll. He is their Chief Brand Officer. He's been at the organization for over 20 years and really knows a thing or two. Now, in this episode, we want to get into what makes great brands that are built over many years, but how do you modernize them and make sure they appeal to today's audience? How do you take advantage of modern retail and media choices? And how do you stay up with trends and culture? This is a great conversation. Rankin has got loads of experience and expertise. I know you'll enjoy this one. Here it is. Rankin, welcome to the show.
Amazing to be here, John.
Well, I'd love to know, how did you end up at Mars? What's been your journey to Mars? And then, what got you here?
I started my career, I'm Canadian. I started in marketing. Actually, I started in banking technically, but I was going to be master of the universe. I decided that wasn't for me. And my first job was actually at what was, before there was Yum, there was Tricon. And I worked in the Pizza Hut business in product marketing. And that was great, and I learned so much in that role, and really the culture of a company like Pepsi, which was an offshoot of that, was a fascinating place to kind of grow up and learn about fact-based marketing, about evidence-based marketing, and learn about big brands and big propositions. So that was a great place to start. And during that time, obviously, I got connected in the advertising world and really started to appreciate creativity, how great work got made, what it took to get to quality of brief, to get to the right people on the team, et cetera. And that sort of led me into the world of advertising, where I went next. And I was a less than super effective suit, but I did enough to get by. And I learned a lot about creativity and working with creatives and how to get the most out of them. We talked about that a bit earlier, actually, around what does it take? It takes a great account person to, and I'm not saying I was great, but you learn about what's required.
Yeah.
To unlock the power of that team, the relationship with the client, et cetera, and get to ultimately clean briefs that unlock the creative forces. And that was a really powerful part of my learning journey. And I really fell in love with it, I would say. And from there, I moved to Molson, and really proudly, especially in the context of what's going on today, to get behind a thing called I Am Canadian, a really famous and highly awarded campaign. But again, that was kind of, you had all the marketing levers there. So that was the first time I had, in a traditional sense, all of the levers at disposal to really build a brand, in that case, Molson Canadian. And that experience really opened up possibility, opened up the understanding at that time of what was earned, shared, paid, owned in those contexts. That's before social, et cetera. But we were trying things. We were trying viral experiments. So it was really interesting. Anyway, from there, I followed a fellow that I worked with there, Richard Kellum. He went to Mars, and he worked for about a year to convince me, because Mars has a tradition of having factory-based locations. So they're quite exotic. Slough
big.
Here in the UK.
Yes.
And in that case, Bolton outside of Toronto. Anyway, long story short, I went there, and that was the, I didn't think I'd stay anywhere for where I've stayed, which is nearly 20 years now, or actually more than 20 years. I've been nearly 20 years in the UK. So I was in Toronto working on Mars, on the snack business, on candy brands. I did that for about 3.5 years. And then the last year I was there, the pipeline was kind of dry for content. And we made, with BBDO in Toronto, ads for Mars Bar and for Twix, and actually for Snickers as well. But the Mars ad and the Twix content got picked up and went global and was very successful. And so that led to conversations with a lovely woman, my good friend Jane Wakely, who was leading the European marketing function at Mars then, and she encouraged me to come on over. So I came to the UK, and I've been in roles, regional leadership roles, global leadership roles. I've been a general manager as well. So I ran our ice cream business, which meant I had an ice cream factory, and I could make up products.
That's like a dream role.
Honestly, it was one of the most fun times ever. I mean, the reason I didn't sort of stay in that stream a little bit was mobility. In our culture, general managers, you're moving on a constant basis. So that just wasn't set up for me personally, effectively. Or my family. So I came back to what I love, which is marketing and marketing leadership. And sort of I've been in business unit head, CMO, and now in the role I'm in, which I've been in the last 4.5 thereabouts years, is really building Mars Snacking, marketing and transforming to become in line with where consumers are going, to digitalize our marketing efforts, to become much more data-driven, bringing in technology, learning about it, being curious about it, and then embedding it into to how we build brands and really changing how we build brands.
Yeah.
So that's been sort of what we've been up to for the last really 3 years in earnest. I'd say it took us a couple of years to get it together. And we really run a central branding organization, but we're embedded in our regions. So just without getting into too much of the organizational knitting, I have teams that sit in the US, in Europe, in China, and also managing emerging markets. And they bring, center of excellence and expertise and creativity and content, working with agencies, obviously. And we really believe that by focusing on expertise versus generalists who do a bit of everything, we've seen really improved outcomes.
Because I was curious, because you're a chief brand officer. So how does that role differ for the chief marketing officer? And are they separate in the organization? Are you providing the kind of intercompany expertise and approaches, and does the CMO manage the brand? Or how do those things kind of work together?
We run a growth office, so we call it. And within the growth office is what we call brand stewardship, and that's my group, the brand office, if you will, the brand office within the growth office. There's an innovation leadership team. There is data and analytics. And then there's the strategic component, and that's the business strategy. So what are the issues we're facing into where to play, how to win? Whereas our team is really about brand foundations, brand compasses, brand keys. What's the meaning? What's the story? What's the archetypal, foundation of the brand? And then the content that supports that, and modernizing and digitalizing that effort across all levers and adapting it for local relevance.
Yeah.
So it's really a dedicated team that's focused just on that. And we leave some of the other parts of the marketing mix, innovation, for example, to other people. And then the last piece of the puzzle is within the regions. So we have a regional CMO in the US who is making choices about priorities, which brands, because she's got, I think it's 40 something brands that she could choose from in our snacking portfolio. So she's making choices around that, how to deploy her team's efforts, and really making sure that the briefs we're getting are grounded in business insight and grounding in what are the problems we're trying to solve, what are the pain points we're trying to solve for. And our job is to make sure, is the brief high quality? Can we work with it? And is it going to meet their needs? And then we take that away and we come back with solutions.
You were talking about modern marketing there as well, which I thought was quite interesting because I don't know if you saw the Unilever announcement recently where they're shifting, I think 50% of all, protecting brand investment at 16% of revenue, which I thought is, I guess they're famously brand led, aren't they? But the interesting thing below that was the shift to social. And within that, 20 times increase in influencers, which really stood out as a bit of a statement of intent. Yeah. What's been your kind of journey in terms of where you're investing your mix?
Yeah, I loved reading that. I thought it was super interesting. Fundamentally, we've made shifts. Number one, in terms of media spending, you would have looked at our media spend in 2019, and you would have seen us 60% dedicated to really linear, vehicles, and sort of 30-40% digital. That's pretty much flipped. So we've moved into, and it's not just online video; it's into digital display, et cetera, et cetera. So we've made the move to digital. Our linear spend is in the US 25%, and in China it's actually much less. So that shift has been made. But then you have to follow that on to say, okay, how do we get value out of those choices? So we had a big move to drive addressability. You have more and more the ability to personalize both your targeting of where you put the work, but also targeting and optimizing the work increasingly in real time now. We're getting there. So I think the shift has been, one, the media choice, and then two, the content to actually unlock. Because it's one thing to place addressable media. It's another thing to bring the content that actually delivers. So I think that's been the shift. And now I think the big shift that we're driving for now is, what does personalization at scale actually mean? How do we unlock co-creation with our fans? And that could be, and really to do those things, and we talk about no dead end relationships. So if I interact with you once, if I build a brand world and I invite you into the brand world, well, that can be a one-off transaction, or it can lead to something else, Orchestrating that in an FMCG world is not simple. Getting the data you need to do that out of the systems, out of the walled gardens, et cetera, is not simple. So we're on a journey to unlock that. And that's been super fascinating and continues to be challenging, but it's exciting. And it requires massive curiosity and we don't know the answer. And to live in a world where you're continuously asking and remaining curious about consumer behavior, remaining curious about culture and competition, for that matter, and remaining curious about technology. So all those forces are coming into play about what we're doing. But I come back to this personalization at scale and co-creation. That's opening our minds to what the Unilever CEO is talking about, which is in a world where we still believe reach. We're advocates for EBI and Byron Sharp and all those, that wisdom. We still are building big brands that require access to billions of consumers. But how we access them and how we reach them has changed utterly. And now I'm in conversations about, could I run an earned plan only, but that drives reach? What does that look like? What is the mixture and combination of creators or influencers that I would have to leverage distributed against my audiences? And could you run that? So that's kind of the provocation, to say, work back from that. Now, the answer is that's probably not the right answer, but if we don't go there and explore that and be committed to that and not say, yeah, but it's an adjunct to paid. We'll do the big paid play that we always have and then come in later. So look, I think it's a world of trying new things. It's a world of we probably don't know the answer, but if we don't try and we don't measure, and I think that's the last piece of this puzzle is, the other thing that's changing, and I think it was touched on as well in the article, was how we measure is changing utterly. And, as long as I think we're wired to what are the business outcomes that both ourselves and our agency partners not only understand, but possibly get rewarded and remunerated on. So changing that, the nature of that relationship is really important, because that makes everyone take it very seriously, obviously. But then high-level output metrics, but then what are the few critical input metrics across the various levers? What are the input metrics, obviously, for media? What are the input metrics for brand PR? What are the input metrics for what we call connected commerce? To understand, are we effective? Are we efficient? And by the way, we have this conversation about performance versus equity. Well, it's both. And so I think we probably overcorrected for a while and leaned, everything was getting quite transactional. And can I get you to conversion? And I think that's the watch out I've had personally, to say, we had to overcorrect to push people there. And now I think we're sort of rowing back to say, look, if we are driving ROIs in the short term, but over time our equities, like if the long and the short don't work, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a really powerful conversation to balance, yes, the modern approach to marketing, taking advantage of the tools and the data and the audience information we have, taking advantage of more and more closed loop, from inspiration to conversion, data that we can get our hands on, getting into, and this is where the real rub is, the attribution piece across levers. All of that, to me, is what's in play.
Yeah.
So it leads to some really interesting times.
It does. It really does, actually. I mean, we did at System One, actually, we took part in a kind of cross-company study with Walk. So Walk Analytic Partners, System One, Bearer AI. And we were trying to work out the performance versus brand debate. It's like one of those perennial debates, isn't it? Is how do you get the right mix? And it's really, I mean, to cut to the answer, of course, as you said it in what you're just saying there, is both, obviously. But it's really fascinating. So performance only, the difference between performance only and brand only was outperforming in ROI sense by performance only by about 90%. And then if you do both, you get another 10 or 20% on top of that sort of thing. So with so many brands going down performance only, they're just missing this huge impact for longer term brand building. But of course, if you get both right, and what we found as well in the study, this is kind of using some of our System One data, is the long drives the short, but the short doesn't drive the long. And this is also something I think people forget, is that there is performance marketing even within your equity building campaigns.
Yes.
that have this kind of halo benefit.
100%. And I think that's where we got to, because you started to get into some slightly simplistic statements like, well, if it doesn't work in the short term, it doesn't matter what it does in the long term. And that's not wrong, but that's not the whole answer. And you've got to be building meaningful brands that are recognizable and distinctive and consistent. The power of consistency for us, and if I just look at, You're Not You When You're Hungry as one example, or things on Skittles, I mean, those are probably our two most consistent, most famous, and the value I believe that we believe in, there's tangible business value in those assets because they are assets in our business. Yeah. And, we change them, we adjust them at our peril, I think.
Well, you've hit on something there, actually, because if I was to put one word to Mars, if I was to say what one word describes Mars, I'd say consistency. Yeah. Because I can think of, a Mars a day, work, rest and play, or you're not you when you're hungry, or Snickers, or the rainbow with Skittles. I can easily call to my mind the pack imagery, the strap lines, the campaign quite easily. Yeah. And I've got a lot of things going on in my head, but I can access those. But they've been built up over many, many years. I was wondering, actually, obviously Mars is a privately owned organisation versus public. What's driving that consistency? Is it a cultural thing? Is it a strategic choice? Is it an ownership?
I start from, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? So what we've been gifted with some of these brands is incredible. You think about the history of a brand like M&M's and the legendary advertising it was made and really ramped up probably in the early noughties, as we say. But that brand and that history and that consistency, recognition, amazing place to start. Yes, you're not you when you're hungry's famous, but if you actually go back even into the 80s, we were kind of going in that direction. So we were always building, well before I arrived, to be clear, but there was a thread of consistency already in the brand story. And then some brilliant folks at BBDO, Dave Lubars, Peter Kane, and John Carlo unlocked it. And they just said, here's the way to say this that is deeply relevant every day to every human being on the face of the earth, and we can make it incredibly entertaining. So that was just a moment that we've not looked back from. Now, interestingly, we've played a bit. I talked about people, and we got into, for business reasons I won't bore you with, we're missing an opportunity. In very simplistic terms, there's sort of energy and sort of, let's call it recharge. Thank you. There are recharge moments that you turn to a Snickers bar for. But there's also this space called reward. And we start, and that's more mellow, that's more taste notes, that's more experiential. And we got a little bit lost of trying to be both. And we made some work that was not very good because it was not focused and it was not single-minded. I think we caught ourselves in time and we kind of came back to the core in the story. So I guess the point of that is that we really have learned by making mistakes and making mistakes and course correcting. But back to the nature of your question, which is the family ownership. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We're given these brands, and we are stewards, we are custodians. And it's interesting to be in a company where there's people walking around who are named Mars. And they're actually incredibly generous, incredibly accessible. Now, they're tough customers as well, and they should be. I mean, these are you think about assets, right? You know, you think about any asset you have in your life. Well, these brands, that's their family's asset. And so they are rightly incredibly careful. They take them, they're jewels in their crown. And I think once you understand that you're not just here experimenting, this is someone's livelihood and asset base, that adds a level of care and consideration, because they're personal somehow, to a marketer in Mars's experience. But also, there's a deep understanding of the brands, like in people's bones over decades, and they've been passed along in a family. So it's an interesting dynamic that's just a different part of the conversation. When I worked in public companies, it was not part of the dynamic. Of course, brands are precious. Of course, they are the jewels in the crown of the organization, but somehow when it's personal, it's different. I don't know if that's very clear, but that's sort of my experience of it.
No, mate, I totally think. I think this is something that in marketing, what we're so much on the hamster wheel, and people change roles all the time, people change companies all the time. But most people I've met who work at Mars have been there a bit like yourself, 10, 15, 20 years. Yeah. And the institutional knowledge and expertise that is kept within the organization, and the belief in the long term as well, making decisions over a longer period rather than the short period. And I think there's a lot for businesses to learn, the power of respecting what's gone before, taking decisions over a longer term, being consistent. I mean, we did a report recently called Compound Creativity, and what it demonstrated, we only looked over 5 years. I mean, if we looked over 10 or 20, it would have been even more. But those that were consistent not only had a better return, but the return got better And the gap between consistent brands and inconsistent brands just grew over time. So it's a competitive advantage, I think, having that longer term view, isn't it?
It is, because you're not having to re-educate and spend money to just, start again, if you will. But I'll come back to the key theme that I don't want to miss here is partnership. We have long-term partnerships with the BBDOs and the DDBs of the world. That is critical to everything we've just talked about. So, and by the way, not just long-term partnerships with the company, but with people. We've had, for good or for bad, the same people working on our brands at BBDO for a long time. Now, of course, people change, but there's been a few key players, both in the creative side, and there are people I've literally worked with for over 15 years, for good or for bad, but the consistency and the understanding of why, and a shared understanding of why. And when we worked on what, we call them creating strategies of desire, and that really starts from, Ehrenberg Bass kind of thinking, seeking distinctiveness, and building on that. But we built that together. And we built that understanding and built that into the archetypal and the brand keys, or what we call the brand compass, which we also take very seriously. And we do that because we don't want to fall into the trap of the new brand manager syndrome. So it rocks up and say, I want to do something new. I want to change this. Why? Let's see the business. So let's start with the evidence. What's the evidence? And that doesn't mean we're static, and it doesn't mean we're complacent. It just means whatever you're going to change, we're going to have to understand why exactly. And is it about the brand fundamentally? Is it about the foundations of the brand? Or is it something tactical in the short term that's really about execution? And being super clear on that conversation, I think, is incredibly helpful. And what helps that is partners on both sides who have the experience. Now, the risk of that, obviously, is people get long in the tooth, people get overconfident in the history and they stop being curious. And I think that's the tension. How do you maintain consistency? How do you maintain what's powerful and foundational, but remain open-minded, remain curious, and understand that you've got to shift probably more the tactics to remain relevant than necessarily the foundational stuff?
Well, that's a great question. Maybe I'll put it back to you. How do you do that? Because I think you're right. Often some of the best relationships I've seen at play, I'd almost argue the agency sometimes has more institutional knowledge of the brand than the new brand marketing director that's turned up. And you can just see that the respect for the brand and the idea, the positioning, where it's come, all that sort of stuff. It's amazing. But you're absolutely right. There comes a point where you lose that freshness, you lose that momentum. So how do you keep that kind of energy, momentum, creativity alive while also respecting the longevity?
Yeah. And I think it's true on both our side of the table as well as the agency side of the table. There's a few, I'm going to call them foundational players, who remain consistent, but you need to change the cast around them and bring in, whether it's creative teams who understand deeply how to work with creators or how to be social first in an effective way, not just to show off for company because you're supposed to, but because actually the best route on this consumer journey to access the consumer and be convincing is that, and you have expertise governed and guided by the wisdom of, so I think it's really about maintaining a few central players, if you can, hopefully, on both sides of the table, but refreshing that with the right talent, with the right updated expertise, who understand what the hell they're talking about. So you don't have sort of unfrozen cavemen, here's the social, because it used to be, here's the paid stuff, the traditional TV, like we've always done, and here's some social and some Twitter and this and that, and it was just rubbish. It was just like, come on, who are we kidding? That is a throwaway to just get through the presentation, really, and we'd execute it, nothing much would happen. I mean, I'm being a bit extreme, but now we are starting audience first. We're bringing in depth of expertise and also the relationship between our media and our creative agency, critical to success. And now our brand PR agency. Right now, those are different shops, and that makes it super interesting and super complex. So we're working through those things. But back to relationships, back to trust, back to, do you have a team that is like aces in their places, if you will, and you're refreshing with I think the right talent, the right capabilities. We spend a lot of time talking about the capability agenda, especially internally, because if you don't understand how things are measured, if you don't understand how the mechanics work with the consumer, you will make a lot of mistakes and waste a lot of time and money. So I think that's been part of it.
It's funny, we were chatting over a coffee, weren't we, before, about in praise of the suit. I mean, you had your stint, didn't you, as you described it on the suit side of things. But I think that's an under-recognised role so often in these things. Again, if I look back at my own experience, the best things I've been involved in, obviously you've got great creative ideas. Obviously you've got super sharp clarity coming from your strategy. But it's often those account handlers that are brilliant at getting the best out of people, that are brilliant at understanding the complexity of the client side. I mean, one of my favourite episodes I've ever done was Clean DeCourcy, who was hugely awarded at Wiseman & Kennedy. Ran Nike account for 10 years, and then she became a client herself over at Snap, and she describes it as like suddenly her world, her eyes were opened up to what she calls 4D chess. Yes. She goes, I couldn't believe the complexity and agendas I was then suddenly having to kind of shuffle around. And it wasn't just about pitching the idea. I had to kind of, balance all these agendas. And I think the brilliant role that the best suits, if we call them suits, but the best kind of account handlers play is they really understand the business need, the challenges, the agenda, how you execute. But they also know how to get the most out of the kind of creative teams and bring the best ideas and get them through, sort of thing.
Absolutely. And I if I think about some of the most challenging, provocative stuff I've been involved with, certainly on a brand like, say, Skittles, and my great friend Ari Weiss, who's sadly passed on, we did stuff that I never would have imagined we would do. And it was about his imagination unlocking and me going, I think that sounds really cool and really interesting and interesting because the consumer and culture will grab it and run with it and will be engaged by that headline. So creative concept, solid. But we were coming into a former CFO, now a CEO of an American part of the American division of Mars, and saying, so here's the thing. We want to launch a Broadway show for Skittles on Super Bowl Sunday, and we're not going to buy an ad, but it's going to be big. Trust me. And here's how it's going to work. Yeah. And that was a great meeting. It was one of the ones I'll never forget. But to your point, all the orchestration within her organization was less about me than it was about the suit, Rich Guest, who was the account guy, and his role was understanding the business realities, the business needs, why this crazy idea actually. And it wasn't just coming through me, it was coming through him and his connectivity in the organization, one. Two, going through those processes, as you would know, you go back and forth with your creative partner. And we got to some pretty tough places, and Ari was pretty famous for taking a position and holding fast to that position. Rich had to navigate those things. Yeah. Between us, for us, and without him, I'm quite convinced we would not have been, not got the result we got to. So you're absolutely right. I think I just use that example to make the point that it's about navigating the personalities, but deeply understanding the forces and the motivations of each of the players and using that in his 4D chess game to keep people motivated, to keep people talking, to find a solution where there apparently isn't one. By the way, they understand the legal components. By the way, they understand our responsible marketing. So in Mars, if you talk about our level of responsibility and the principles that we adhere to, we've got a whole other set of parameters that many marketers do, but it's a complex game to land something that feels provocative, that puts you in what feels like a risk position. Yeah. And what's the risk mitigation? So all of those things are the stuff that make famous headline-winning campaigns. And in a family-owned business, as we talked about before, no one person can navigate that. So if you don't have a partner who understands that, you'll either go much slower or you'll get a diluted outcome. Or you'll get what you want, but it'll take forever. And by the time, it'll be past its due date sort of thing. So, but yes, it's a long way of saying I completely agree that, and I was talking to my friends at BBDO about this the other day. We could have the best creativity, the best creative teams, and the best planners in the world. If the suit can't bring it together and navigate it both internally as well as with us, it will go nowhere. And we will waste a lot of really precious resource.
That's so true. I had a very, very brief stint actually between jobs doing kind of freelancing for a number of agencies, helping them with business development mainly. So I wrote this little presentation called 10 Things You Never Knew About a CMO. And I think the number one, I have to go and look, I think the number one point I started with is your customer has a customer. Understand them is the secret to the whole relationship. So, treating you as the customer is one thing, but actually who are your customers? Your customer might be Tesco. Your customer might be the CEO. Your customer might be the sales team. Your customer might be regional CMOs who have all got their own P&L and brand and objectives sort of thing. And I think that a lot of this starts in going beyond the transactional immediate relationship and understanding you and what you have to deal with on the other side of the decision.
Well, that's so right. And I have lots of stories of being taken by sales teams into customers like Walmart.
Yeah.
And there's a famous one that I was still in Canada. We went to visit Walmart. And honestly, and this guy was a mate of mine, so we got on. But he brought me in, and I think the opening question was, would you rather make a fast nickel or a slow dime? I'm like, from the
Great
buyer.
question. Yeah.
It's like, but there's no right answer either.
Yeah.
There's no wrong, there's no right. But that was the opener. And the sales guy's just looking at me going, off you go.
Yeah. Over
and
to
that
you.
became a 20-minute conversation with this Walmart customer. And it was bonkers, honestly. Yeah. But he was just having a go and saying, what are you made of? A little bit. So, and then we got to the real conversation. Anyway, it's an anecdote to say that's a world that if you don't understand what they deal with every day.
Yeah.
And again, back to our structure in Mars, yes, we have a specialist center of excellence on creativity, but it also requires that I partner with the regional CMO in the US or Europe to say, we do have to make this work in activation at your biggest, sorry, I'm getting too far from the mic. We do have to make this work in activation at our biggest customers. And they have to be as excited about You're Not You and You're Hungry or, Taste the Rainbow as we are and as the consumer is. And they've got to see a route through to the consumer's excitement coming through their channel.
Yeah.
And so what is that activation plan? How do you make it live and work in their, whether it's physical or digital environments, in a way that they can get behind and get super excited about? And I think that's the everyday reality for a regional CMO.
You've given me so many flashbacks to my client-side days where I'll be in the creative meeting going, I love this idea. What am I going to tell Tesco tomorrow when I'm doing my annual negotiation?
Yeah.
And you got to think like that, which is incredible. Just pivoting a little bit. So I jumped on the System One database just to look at, how all your campaigns done over the last 5 years, UK and US. Start with the UK, because this was a real fun one for me. But I noticed that your Twix campaign came out top, which I thought was brilliantly funny. The kind of left and right with the bears.
Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious. So, but Twix isn't a brand that I've heard as much from as some of the others in your portfolio. So what was the thinking behind that campaign, and where are you taking the Twix brand? Yeah,
listen, Twix is an amazing brand, and it's surprising to most people who come into our business, both from the outside or it's $1 billion brand. It's just quietly become a massive brand. And part of that is the nature of the product. It's quite unique in many ways. It sort of stands out if you're thinking about your favorite snacks. It's quite different. It's got a fan base, but it's got a lot of people come in and try it and have a go and maybe stick with it. So I guess it kind of crept up on us in the sense of we've got a jewel here that we are underworking. Now, we've always told stories about, we quite famously, the left and right campaign. I think the Bears is one of my favorite executions of it. But I think what we determined was that is rooted in this idea of you're always choosing between one or the other. And when we looked at culture and we started to look at consumer behavior, not just attitudes, but more importantly, behavior, what we saw, percolating was this idea of abundance, an idea of maximalism, idea of I don't want to choose because life's a bit rubbish and things are hard and everything that you see in the world is what it is. I just want to feel a sense of a little bit about control, a little bit about I can be very happy. I don't have to choose. And so maximalism became sort of this conversation we started having with the team at Adam and Eve. And then we started saying, well, actually, Twix as an experience is chocolate and biscuits and caramel twice, simply. But we all know that. But it's one of those, it's so simple that you could kind of miss it. So we came back to, and it's one of the things that differentiates us as well in the category, we're 2 bars. And really making that the story, but it's not about choosing one versus the other. It's about 2.
Yeah.
And we landed on this idea of, okay, stupid, 2 is more than 1. Which, when Rick Brim presented it, was brilliant because he said, and some mad genius came up with this great concept. 2 is more than 1. and that just led the creative. And that's one of those briefs that when you put it on the table, and I love listening to Ant and Mike and Rick at Adam and Eve talk about this because when you put that brief in the middle of the room, the creatives are just like hounds. They're just jumping on it going, I could work that all day. That has led to our new campaign, 2 is more than 1, which is just launched. And we're excited about that. And it's why we're excited beyond the idea and beyond giving Twix a little other kick is it's rooted in culture, but it's also, we're really majoring on paid, earned, shared, owned. So thinking a lot more about ASO, as we call it, earned, shared, owned. And how do we generate headlines? How do we generate co-creation opportunities? And so a lot of the media choices we're making are really different for the brand. So what's interesting is we sort of soft launched it in the US actually around Super Bowl. And we created, the team created this idea of second screen stare down. So during the Super Bowl, the data says, I think it's like 60% of people are second screening for good or for bad for society. That's what's happening. So we said, well, that's something. 2 screens. Okay, great. 2 bars. That's interesting. So the game was, you downloaded the game or went to the site and the game was it's a stare down. So when the commercial goes on, you click on and you stare and your eyes have to stay on the phone and there's 2 Twix bars looking at you with 2 funny eyes. And then anyway, we got hundreds of thousands of people staring at their bloody screen for 40 minutes during the Super Bowl. Again, for good or for bad. But it was kind of a nice way into 2 is more than 1. And I think they won a couple of gold bars. It was good fun. But that was a pure earned idea.
Yeah.
We juiced it with a little bit of paid at the end, but it was really owned on like our own channels and our earned channels. And we got tremendous traction. So that was a huge learning for us around experiments in this new world. Because we know 50% of media is consumed outside of paid, creators, social, et cetera. So how do we build brands with meaning so that every touch point is rich? And I think that's the other big shift back to our point about performance versus equity. I think we used to live in a world where traditional channels, we'd have great content. The other channel, we're a bit rubbish. We couldn't get great quality experiences for the brand. And I think that has been proved to be untrue.
Yeah.
And so the challenge is now, how do we get every touch point working in isolation for its own sake, for itself, if you will? Because I think it used to be, well, because the world is not, you don't see one thing and paid and then move to the next. There's a great piece about this idea of mosaic. And brands are built in mosaics, but every touch point has got to resonate and stand on its own. And by the way, when they come together, it's a multiplier. Yeah. But the idea that you go from one to the next in a linear journey is just craziness.
I like that idea. It has to work on its own and it has to work together. And when you see the both, you get something bigger. That's
and I
really
think
nice.
That's been motivating us to say it's an experience by itself.
Yeah.
So the second screen stare down is this crazy idea, but when you start to see it in the context of a bigger campaign, it's like, oh, yeah, it really makes sense. So
the thing I love about the story, as you told there, is the power of simplicity. That
yes.
The idea is very simple, the execution is very simple. It's amazing how hard it is to come up with something so simple, isn't it?
And we're doing another one, which is it's a voice note. Voice notes is the thing, so I've learned. And if I want to, I can go into this machine we've created with a really interesting company. You can send your mate a voice note, but it's amplified and it's harmonized. So you send them whatever the voice note is, some bad news, but we bring together your voice with multiple harmonies. So again, 2 is more than 1, so it's 2 voices, not 1 anyway. But it's just trying things.
Yeah.
Little things, small things, but they line up strategically, and hopefully the consumer gets that connectivity.
Yeah.
And that multiplier.
Well, talking of simple things and personalizing, I did love your own goal that you created on Snickers. It's a really, just explain that for anyone listening that's not come across it. It's very clever, but it's a good example of this idea of a simple idea using AI to...
Yeah, so we became really interested in the application of AI in our creative production. And we just started looking at different use cases. And we were sponsoring and involved in the Euros in 2024. And we said, how could we bring, just let's go have a go, and what would that look like? And the team came back, the guys at T&P M came back, with this idea where in the world of you're not you and you're hungry, you make mistakes. So when you're hungry, sometimes you make a mistake. Well, in a Euro context, what's an own goal? So when you make an own goal, what do we do with that idea? And then Snickers is the brand of banter. Snickers is a brand about your mates. And then we said, okay, let's give consumers an opportunity to create some banter. in a branded way, delivered in a really powerful way if you're a football fan. So simply said, you could go on WhatsApp and say, and it was like the simple prompt, John, what's your mate's name? John. What's his own goal? He ate garlic before the big meeting. I don't know, whatever. That's one of the bad ones. And then that would go into the Jose Mourinho 2000 machine. And within 2 to 3 minutes, you'd get a video of Jose, AI generated, obviously, sending your mate a little bit of stick. And then you could send it to him.
Yeah.
And it was that simple. So the cool thing was the interface was dead simple.
Yeah.
It was completely on brand. It was about co-creating. So we talk a lot about co-creation and personalization at scale. So through WhatsApp, I can send you a bit of banter from a legendary coach in the context of the Euros.
Yeah.
It's so Snickers. It's super fun.
That's brilliant. Simple, funny, memorable. I mean, it just works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, if I look at my System 1 data on the US, one of your brands in your portfolio dominates our scoring. In fact, I had to scroll a long way to find anything not related to this. Do you know which brand I'm talking about?
Skittles or M&Ms?
M&Ms.
M&Ms.
Yeah, M&Ms. Yeah, it's just incredible. In fact, I wasn't expecting it to be quite as dominated as it was, which was interesting. But a lot of the Super Bowl content, in fact, we've been measuring Super Bowl for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And actually M&Ms is one of the most consistent performers, always in the kind of top 5 or 10, always scoring high 4 or 5-star results. It's amazing. But I think it's one of the things I love about what you do on M&Ms is just back to Ehrenberg Bass, you talked about being kind of partners with them earlier. It's just a masterclass in kind of distinctive brand assets, isn't it? And how to use them and bringing them to life with humor and memorability.
Yeah.
It just really, because going back to your mosaic point actually about the individual and the collective, is the great thing about the characters is it does join up all those things in a beautiful way, doesn't it?
It does. And so you've got this remarkable asset that's survived, decades. And then the trick is, how do you make it relevant in culture? And if you go back through the reel of M&Ms over the last 30 years, we've been pretty successful at doing that. Whether it's through music tie-ins, whether it's through celebrity tie-ins, whether it's through linkage to major set-piece events like the Super Bowl, we've been pretty effective at tapping into culture and bringing the characters into whatever scenarios. And then we had the experience where we went down the road of inclusiveness, and we're still there, by the way, happily, still there, where we opened up the brand and said, we're going to make it more inclusive because we believe that's principally right. And then the execution became that we're changing the characters a bit and we're expanding the crew to bring in a bit more balance. And that got some reaction. And navigating through that was back to dealing with assets that people own. They go, that's my brand. Don't forget that. Navigating through that. Now, the success of that, because in the end, I think the measurement on that will be very strong. It was certainly effective in market. But it was tapping into culture. It hit a nerve. It got massive headlines, as you'll remember. But then we didn't ever get too serious about that, because some of those headlines could have been taken very seriously, and we could have been drawn into something that would have been really unpleasant. And I think we navigated as the brand we are. We kept it light. We kept it humorous. We didn't take the bait. In fact, we fed it a little bit. And we had some fun. Like, we canceled the characters, but we didn't really.
That was genius. I remember that.
We've gone too far, all this stuff. And that provoked the debate again. But I think we remained who we are. And at the end, we let the air out of it. Although people really didn't. They thought we were serious. It was wild. But anyway.
Yeah.
And then we let the air out of it during the game. And I think that experience was at times super challenging and quite scary, I would say, at times, because you realize the magnitude. But we had risk mitigation. But I think we stayed true to who the brand was. And we never kind of, as I say, took the bait. And that was a fascinating experience. But all the while, the assets, the distinctive assets, the characters remained intact, remained who they were. And we rode on their back, and we continue to do so. So it's a brilliant brand. And it's just, how do we keep playing with the characters and culture in ways that are engaging and interesting and endearing? Because that's the other thing about it. People love them.
They do. I mean, the moment you said you're taking them away from Super Bowl, all hell breaks loose, doesn't it?
And like, it was a serious conversation.
Yeah.
And it's just funny, even as you're working content, is when all else fails, just get the characters in there.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's some craft and some good writing that goes with it, but they're very powerful.
Hugely powerful. In fact, I can give a tiny data point on this, actually. We looked at the average score for every ad with a celebrity in,
Yeah.
the average score with every ad without celebrity, and the average score for every ad with, system when we call it fluent device, it's something that comes to mind quickly when you think about the brand, which this is a brilliant case of. The average celebrity ad was exactly the same as the average ad, 2.7 versus 2.7. With fluent devices, M&M's being probably the best example of that, 3.8. It literally was worth an entire star. So those characters that have been built up in many years, create personality, association with the brand, are outperforming pretty much every celebrity you can think of in a Super Bowl ad. I mean, they are celebrities in their own right in a way, but I think that they're not particularly in fashion. I mean, this is something I think if I was starting out in a new brand role, I'd be straight in on this and going, well, what character can we create, that we can associate with the brand over time? It's probably one of the biggest hacks that marketers overlook.
Yeah, well, it's literally a distinctive asset. It's not a saying. It's not a tagline. It's not a strapline. It's not a graphic. It's a living personality. Yeah, that becomes and funny. Fans know them. Yeah, fans talk about them. They know their backstory. They make up their backstory. It's wild to watch.
It's also fascinating how far they travel. So, like the Kate Spade collaboration you did, for example, was a great example of can you imagine partnering your brand, a candy brand, if you use the American phrase, a candy brand's character can partner with a sort of high-end fashion designer. I mean, that's wild when you think about it, and yet it works.
It is, and the collabs that we're entertaining, whether it's Adidas or Kate Spade or others that are coming, you're right. It's fascinating how, because sometimes you kind of go, really? No, the answer is yes, really. Yeah. Why? Because they are iconic brands and the characters people have grown up with, and they just don't let go. So they become adults, and they're still got an affinity and an affinity, I guess, for the characters, and they still find them entertaining. Yeah. Now, the trick is, how do you maintain their voice, which change creative teams, so again, back to longtime partners, you've got to understand their voice. You've got to understand their backstory. Because if you play with that, it will be inauthentic. And the fans will go, what's going on? And they do when we get it wrong. Hopefully we don't do that too often. But yeah, so just understanding the characters, maintaining that, the assets as they are and what their strengths are. But then the other thing we're really having fun with is bringing them together. That's at the heart of our whole emphasis on the brand is it's more fun together. Yeah. So how do you get interactions between brands? Red and yellow were the setup man and the punchline, but now we've got green coming in a lot more than we used to. We've introduced purple, browns, and orange is hilarious, sort of this really nervous Nelly character. But the other thing is they're all human traits that people relate to. So
100%. Yeah.
Anyway,
and it makes it universal, doesn't it? Because it's not a person; it's character. everybody can relate. Yeah, and it makes it universal.
The big question we ask ourselves: are they famous or are they delicious? The answer is they're both.
Exactly. Well, maybe to round up then, because by the way, I could talk about this for a long time because you've got so many kind of gems in your portfolio. Quite a tricky question, but looking back on your career, because you've got 20 years at Mars, you're in a great role as Chief Brand Officer. What would be the bit of advice you might have given your younger self starting out? Anyone listening today is thinking, I like the sound of Rankin's role. What advice would you give somebody wanting to do the kind of role that you do that may surprise them to know?
I'd probably sort of start from what I think has been the heart of whatever success I've had and what I look for as we're building organizations and bringing people in. Curiosity. And I mean that curiosity about consumers, consumer behavior, that's fundamental. And curiosity about culture, curiosity about competition, because there's a lot to be learned from who we're trying to beat on the daily. And curiosity about technology now. I think that's been the big shift for us is, are you curious about what's available? Are you curious about the capability that can be brought to your brand? Are you curious about measurement and how do we improve the effectiveness, the efficiency, et cetera? So it's curiosity in every respect of that. I think creating a culture. So are you creating a culture of creativity, of wonder? Are you creating a culture where the best people in the agency world would kill to work on your brands? And that to me is basic. And back to when the folks at Adam and Eve talk about when we put the brief in the middle of the room, people are jumping to work on it because the idea and the brief is so clear. By the way, it's on a great brand called Twix. important, but the brief is the thing. So are you attracting the best talent in the world, both to your own marketing team, but also to your agency partners? And I go to partners. I think, and this is about the human interactions, trusted partners in every respect. So whether it's, because all the things I've described, whether it's Skittles, whether it's the AI thing, all of that is an outcome of a trusted creative partner, a trusted legal partner, a trusted brand PR partner, trusting and supporting the ambition of the best people in your organization and getting behind them and knowing that, letting them know that you've got their back.
Yeah.
But equally, when you're into the heady stuff and sort of the stuff that feels risky, the stuff that feels career threatening, to be honest, you know that you've got someone with you.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's a creative partner or otherwise. So I think we throw around trust a lot, but no one person does anything that matters in this business. You've got to have a group of willing, trusted leaders who are coming together to drive something through, to try different things and to take some risks. And then I think the last piece, and this has been emphasized certainly across marketing and is relentless measurement. And we are evidence-based, and we always have told that story. But I think it's shifting so quickly now. Back to curiosity about technology, the world of understanding attribution across multiple levers is upon us. It's doable. AI is powering it, and we are starting to get very intentional about what that looks like, how it works, and trying to scale it. And we spend a lot of time on that subject. And then the last thing I'd say is, how do you create space to do the technical and leave space for this wonder and creativity? Because I think that's the other thing. In the pivot we've made the last few years, and all of us in the industry have made, we talked about overcorrecting. We became obsessed with tech. We became obsessed with the application of tech to audience measurement and data to audience identification, measurement, and activation. So it became all about the how, and we sort of didn't put as much time into what.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Right. So let's get back to balance and come back to investing in the magic and the wonder of our brands, because people love these brands, and we need to make more people love them and drive penetration and get to business outcomes. So I think that's this balancing act and making sure we don't forget. It's all about, well, the why, the what, and of course the how will take care of itself.
Later, yeah. Brilliant. That's top advice, by the way, Rankin. Thank you. That's an amazing summary.
Cool.
You've just given us there. So thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us about these brands. And
really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I know everyone's going to get a lot out of this. There's some absolute gold in there. So thank you very much.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you very much for listening or watching Uncensored CMO. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching, hit subscribe there as well. I'd also love to get a review. Reviews make a big difference on other people discovering the show. So please do leave a review wherever you get your podcast. If you want to contact me, you can do. I'm over on X at UncensoredCMO or on LinkedIn, where I'm under my own name, John Evans. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.